Now that you have built an architecture vision with stakeholder buy-in, measurable outcomes, and a credible value case, you are ready to turn that agreement into business architecture clarity. Phase B is where you stop speaking in broad aspirations and start defining what the enterprise must be able to do, how value is delivered end to end, and how the organization should operate to sustain the outcomes. If you do this phase well, technology discussions become easier because you have a clear business anchor. If you do it poorly, technology becomes the strategy, and you end up modernizing systems without improving enterprise performance. Building on the vision, you should treat business architecture as the enterprise blueprint for outcomes, not as a theoretical model. It explains how the enterprise creates value, what capabilities enable that value, and how responsibilities and decision rights should be organized. For leaders, business architecture is valuable because it makes prioritization rational rather than political. For you, it is valuable because it gives you a stable structure for planning change that survives reorganizations and leadership changes. Phase B is where you create the why and what foundation that later architecture domains must serve. With the purpose clear, you begin with capabilities because capabilities provide stability in a world that constantly changes. A capability is an ability the enterprise must have, such as customer onboarding, fraud prevention, billing, workforce scheduling, or incident response. Processes and organizational structures change frequently, but the enterprise still needs the same capabilities to function. When you plan transformation using capabilities, you avoid building roadmaps that collapse the moment the organization restructures. You also give leaders a way to invest in enterprise strength rather than in isolated projects. This is why capability mapping is one of the most practical tools in Phase B. Now that capabilities are your foundation, you need to map them in a way that supports decision making. A capability map should be clear enough that leaders can recognize the enterprise and use it for prioritization, but not so detailed that it becomes a scientific research project. You show what capabilities exist, how critical they are, and where they are weak or fragmented. You can also show ownership because capabilities without ownership become nobody's problem. When your capability map is simple, leaders can ask better questions, such as which capabilities are most critical to strategy and which need investment now. This shifts enterprise conversations from technology preferences to business outcomes. With the map visible, you assess capability health so you can prioritize improvement. Capability assessment is not about criticizing teams. It is about identifying structural weakness, fragmentation, and risk. A capability might be weak because it relies on manual work, because it has inconsistent data, because it is supported by multiple duplicate systems, or because controls are inconsistent. Your job is to describe these gaps in a neutral, evidence-based way and connect them to outcomes such as slower delivery, higher operating cost, or increased risk. This is how you make business architecture a practical input into investment planning rather than a theoretical output. Now that you understand what the enterprise must be able to do, you need to see how it delivers value in motion. Value streams describe the end-to-end flow that delivers a result to a customer or stakeholder. They cut across departments, systems, and handoffs, which is why they expose the real causes of delay and friction. When leaders only look at organization charts, they miss the cross-silo reality that customers experience. Value streams help you design change around outcomes because you see where work stalls, where duplication occurs, and where accountability is unclear. This is where Phase B becomes deeply practical. With value streams in focus, you need to map them in a way that produces usable insight. You keep the value stream mapping at the right altitude, focusing on key stages and handoffs that matter to outcomes, rather than documenting every micro step. Your goal is to identify friction points such as delays, rework loops, decision bottlenecks, and inconsistent data. You also identify where value is created and where value leaks, such as customer drop-offs, service errors, or repeated contacts. When you map value streams this way, you produce a clear story for stakeholders. This is where the enterprise is strong, and this is where improvement will deliver measurable value. Now that you have both capabilities and value streams, you connect them because this is where business architecture becomes a prioritization engine. Capabilities tell you what the enterprise needs to be able to do. Value streams tell you where those capabilities are actually used to deliver outcomes. When you connect them, you can identify which capabilities are most important for the highest value or highest risk value streams. You can also see which capability weaknesses are causing the biggest value stream friction. This lets you prioritize investment with a clear logic. You improve the capabilities that unlock the value stream outcomes the enterprise cares about most. That is leadership-grade prioritization, not guesswork. With prioritization logic in place, you need operating model mapping because outcomes do not happen only through technology. The operating model is how the organization runs, including roles, responsibilities, decision rights, governance, and ways of working. Many transformations fail because they modernize platforms but keep the same old operating friction, such as unclear ownership, slow approvals, and fragmented accountability. Operating model mapping helps you show how work should flow, who owns which capabilities, how decisions are made, and how governance enables speed. This is crucial in phase B because your vision will not be executed unless the organization can operate differently. Now that operating model matters, you ask a leadership question that changes everything. Who owns a capability end to end? Ownership is not only a name on a chart, it is accountability for outcomes, performance, and improvement. When ownership is unclear, capabilities degrade over time and value streams become inconsistent. When ownership is clear, improvements can be planned, funded, and measured. In phase B, you help leaders assign ownership at the right level and define how owners collaborate across teams. This is how you reduce politics and increase delivery predictability, because accountability is visible and decisions do not bounce endlessly between committees. With capability ownership clear, you connect business architecture back to governance, so delivery does not turn into conflict. Business architecture defines priorities and boundaries that governance can enforce. If the value stream requires fast onboarding, governance can prioritize decisions that remove onboarding friction. If a capability is critical and weak, governance can focus standards and investment there. This alignment prevents a common failure, where delivery teams build what is locally optimal but globally inconsistent. Business architecture gives governance a business-centered compass. That is how you avoid governance becoming a technical debate and instead make it a decision system aligned to enterprise outcomes. Now that the approach is clear, imagine you are applying phase B to customer onboarding. Your value stream includes customer interest, identity verification, plan selection, contract acceptance, service activation, and first bill. Your capability map shows abilities like customer identity management, pricing configuration, contract management, service activation, and customer communication. You assess where capability weakness exists, such as inconsistent identity verification or fragmented customer data. You identify value stream friction such as manual handoffs, repeated customer requests, or delays in activation. You then connect these insights to outcomes, such as reducing onboarding time and reducing service errors. This business architecture clarity guides the next phases because technology choices will now be measured by whether they strengthen these capabilities and reduce this friction. Building on the customer example, consider incident response, where outcomes include faster detection, faster containment, and reduced business impact. Your value stream might include detection, triage, investigation, containment, recovery, and lessons learned. Capabilities might include monitoring, identity and access control, asset inventory, vulnerability management, and response coordination. By mapping this, you can see where friction exists, such as unclear escalation paths, missing logs, or weak asset visibility. You can also see which capabilities must be improved to reduce impact, such as consistent monitoring and better access control. This example shows that Phase B is not only for customer journeys, it is also powerful for operational resilience and risk control. Now that you have seen examples, you need to understand how Phase B shapes everything that follows. Business architecture outputs define what technology must serve, not the other way around. Capability priorities shape which application and data investments matter. Value stream friction shapes integration priorities and sequencing. Operating model clarity shapes governance and decision rights, ensuring delivery does not stall. When Phase B is strong, Phase C and Phase D become easier because you already know what must improve and why. When Phase B is weak, later phases drift into platform debates without a business anchor, and the enterprise ends up with modern tools but unchanged outcomes. With the influence clear, you must avoid common Phase B mistakes that reduce credibility. One mistake is making capability maps too detailed and losing stakeholder engagement. Another mistake is mapping value streams without linking them to measurable outcomes, which turns them into workshop artifacts that do not drive investment. Another mistake is ignoring the operating model, which causes technology change without organizational change. Another mistake is leaving ownership unclear, which guarantees that capability improvement will not be sustained. You avoid these mistakes by keeping models simple, connecting everything to outcomes, clarifying ownership, and ensuring the content directly supports prioritization and governance decisions. Now that you know what to avoid, you need to communicate Phase B in a way that drives action. Executives want to see which value streams matter most, which capabilities are weak, and what investment priorities follow. Delivery leaders want to see which friction points must be removed, which dependencies exist, and what guardrails apply. You present business architecture as a story. This is the value the enterprise must deliver. This is where friction exists today. These are the capabilities that must improve. And this is how ownership and operating model changes will enable delivery. When you communicate this clearly, Phase B becomes a shared map for decision making rather than a set of diagrams for architects only. Let's now discuss the key takeaways from what you learned so far so you can apply it immediately. You learned that Phase B business architecture turns your architecture vision into a practical foundation for change by defining capabilities, value streams, and operating model clarity. You learned that capabilities provide a stable way to plan transformation because they survive organizational change and focus investment on enterprise ability. You learned how capability mapping and capability assessment create rational prioritization without blaming teams. You learned that value streams reveal how value flows across silos and expose friction points that cause delays, rework, and customer pain. You learned that connecting capabilities to value streams creates a powerful prioritization engine because it shows which capability improvements unlock the outcomes the enterprise cares about most. You learned that operating model mapping is essential because outcomes depend on ownership, decision rights, governance, and ways of working, not only technology. Finally, you learned that strong Phase B outputs make later architecture phases easier and more effective because technology decisions are anchored to business value and measurable outcomes. Now that you know how to run Phase B business architecture as a practical guide for capabilities, value streams, and operating model mapping, you are ready to make business architecture the backbone of your enterprise change programs. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with your architecture and delivery peers, and comment with one capability in your organization that you believe is most critical but currently weakest, and why.